Jim Wilson, running for District 7 for the Village Council of Estero. Jim, thanks for joining us. Can you kind of take us at the beginning through a bit of your background and talk about your work experience and your time in Estero and etc.?
Sure. I'm originally from Evanston, Illinois, home in Northwestern University. I grew up there and went to grammar school and high school there. And then later on moved to Palatine, Illinois with my first wife. And I think that was in about 1974, and got involved in the community there in Palatine. Was elected to the council in 1980 and served for 27 years in various capacities, chairing all the different committees that were there on that city council. Watched that town grow from about the low about 25,000 when we moved there, and by the time we're leaving, we still own a property there that my current wife's son lives in with his girlfriend, but we're selling that property this year. Now the population's about 65,000, so the only land left is swamps. I mean, so I've seen it all in terms of developments, and some of the projects we went through in the later phases were very, very complicated because of the nature of the land. From a business perspective, I spent about 10 or 12 years as the senior officer of C2 Law Technology, which was a company owned by Commerce Clearinghouse. We were in the legal services business with an IT flair, providing services to maybe 30 or 35 major law firms across the United States. I was then promoted to CCH Corporate, where I was an IT coordinator, building teams to try to bring CCH, which was primarily a printing company. They were the ones that printed the black and gold books that people saw in those days, in the non-electronic days, that people saw in accountants and lawyers' offices. Then after I left them, I started a company called the Professional Link, which was another IT-oriented company, and I sold that company to a competitor. And after that, I went to work with one of my fellow councilmen in a company called Micro Aseptic Products, which had formulas for topical disinfectants, and I was their director of planning and development. We sold that company to another major competitor, and at that point I kind of thought I could retire, but that didn't happen. So another friend of mine who owns a company called RSM Solutions, which is an IT consultant brokerage firm, asked me if I would join him as his CFO because he's very sales oriented and didn't know much about the business end of things. So I've been doing that part-time for him since about 2003. My major accomplishments there, going back to Palatine, to my legislative career on that council, the two or three things that I'm most proud of are the construction of a $75 million water pipeline that went from Palatine through Arlington Heights and Buffalo Grove and Wheeling and went all the way to the Lincoln Street Waterworks at Evanston, which, interestingly, is where I started out. So, but it was the right decision because several of the other towns to the south of us and a little to the east of us made a decision to go to Chicago, to the O'Hare connection off the Chicago water system. Our concerns were that if they did that, they would be captive to Chicago and would have no way to get water on their own. The deal that the four towns that we were involved in cut with Evanston was that if we got into a disagreement about the price of the water or the amount of water we could take, that they would have to go to binding arbitration, and we reserved the right to actually build our own waterworks there in Evanston so that we had total control, and it worked very well. Did that give you enough background, or would?
No, that's fine. So your involvement with IT, what specifically about IT? Is it diagnostic? Is it software?
Well, especially now with RSM Solutions, what we do is find opportunities, and then we find people to match the opportunities. So we are a brokerage firm. Usually we have anywhere from 25 to 45 people working. Right now I think we have about 32 people on assignments working for RSM Solutions.
What sort of opportunity, you say you look for opportunities.
Well,
What's the opportunity?
we have a sales force, and the sales force finds opportunities. They're constantly asking companies, do you have any need for temporary people? Temporary could be as short as a month. I mean, we've got a couple of people on assignments that have been there for 2 years. But there is a reluctance of people to hire long-term people or permanent people, you know, especially if, let's say that they have some major software product, that they've got Oracle or they've got J.D. Edwards or something like that, and they need to upgrade it. Well, they may only need a person for 2 or 3 months to run all the upgrades, test everything, make sure it works, and then they're out of there. So then they don't have to be faced with, oh, we have to lay you off. They just, and a lot of these people are like gunslingers. They move from job to job, and they look at it as an assignment rather than a job. And I think that's true in a lot of industries today.
And so you ended up in Estero in 2011. What brought you
Yeah,
down?
we first started coming to the area in 2009, and we rented for 2 years at Miramar Lakes. Didn't find ourselves that compatible with that environment there. Then we rented for 2 years at Grandeza and found it to be delightful. That there was no discrimination against renters. In fact, we were socially accepted and delighted, and we bought our unit in 2012 and have been there ever since.
What got you interested in this particular race? Had you been involved in the pro-incorporation movement back in its inception?
We were supporters of the pro-incorporation movement, but I serve on the Community Relations Committee, which I described in a couple of forms. People ask, well, what is that? That's kind of the watchdog committee there at Grandeza that looks out for all the stuff that's going on around us, because there's a lot of the vacant land, both in unincorporated Lee County and in Estero, is right near us. Some of it, a lot of it to the east of us out in the Corkscrew Corridor, but of course across the street we now have, everybody was concerned. We had to create a big exhibit that we've put in the lobby of the clubhouse so that people will understand exactly what's going on across the street from the main entrance to Grandeza. There's apartment buildings going in there, and there's 2 other projects on either side of that between Estero Parkway and the entrance into Miramar off of Ben Hill Griffin that will ultimately be developed. Some of it is a 55 plus. The stuff near the parkway is a 55 plus more single-family community. The other side is still kind of to be defined, which is something we're constantly looking at.
If you're elected, what are some of the first things that you think are going to be necessary for the village council to do?
Well, we've got a good transition book from ECCL that highlights a lot of the things that need to be done. Obviously, with the pressure for decisions to be made in a fairly timely manner on future development, we need to get a planning, building, and zoning committee appointed, complying to whatever the state standards are that people have to have in order to serve on such a thing. And they would serve as an advisory panel to the council, just as the ECCP is doing now. But my own personal interest is primarily in the financial area, that I want to work with whoever is appointed as our finance person to make sure that all the different revenue points that we're supposed to qualify for really happen, and that there aren't any glitches in getting us going, because money is the tool that runs anything.
By revenue points, you mean potential sources of revenue that the
Right,
state should
that
be
there are
tapping into,
a
whether it's
bunch of
state
things.
revenue sharing or
Right,
whatever.
whether it's state revenue sharing, whether it's liquor license fees, whatever it is, that we need to go through a giant checklist and make sure that all of that is there. Then that will help us form our operating budget, and then I think we also need a capital improvement or budget of some kind. I think people are going to have wishes, and whether they come from the public or whether they come from other council members, then we need to do very much what the county does. Prioritize those, say, try to get cost estimates on what it would cost to do, either to acquire things, if it's things, or to do projects, if it's projects. And then we can make those decisions to see whether we can afford it, and people can express, again, both citizens and council members can express their opinions as to whether what is the top priority.
You mentioned people will have wishes. What might some of your wishes be if you were to come up with some right now?
Well,
Capital
obviously,
improvements wise.
well, obviously, from the area that I'm coming out of, Corkscrew Road is the biggest problem. Whether it's minor tweaking to get better access in and out of some of these communities, or whether it's the ultimate four-laning of that highway, because if the county is going to approve as many building permits as I think they're gonna approve out there, you know, whether it's Wild Blue or, you know, even Corkscrew Shores is already in the ground and open around those lakes. But when you look at the aerial maps, you can see that there are other lakes on the north side of Corkscrew Road that are gonna make very nice development sites too. So I'm concerned that that's a priority. A lot of the planning stuff has already been done. I mean, I've got a myriad of different planning things that ECCP has done in conjunction with the full conference. So I don't know that we'll have to spend a lot more money initially on planning. I think also we should try to repair any damage that's been done to the relationships either with Lee County or with Bonita as a result of our incorporation effort.
How do you go about doing that specifically?
I think you reach out. I think you instead of looking backwards and saying, well, you know, such and such happened in the past, I think you look at the future. Lee County needs us and we need them. Once we're elected, we'll be negotiating with them on service contracts, because some of the things that they're doing that makes no sense for us to do. Certainly the Sheriff's Department, I don't favor the creation of an Estero Police Department. I don't think it's necessary when you have as many gated communities as we do.
Some of the figures that we've heard is that there'll be a $3 million or so surplus each of the first 5 years. Does that seem like it's excessive to you? Would you rather see some of that money put into some of these other kinds of projects you're talking about?
I think the jury's out on that. The revised forecast that we got with the transition book showed a slightly smaller number, but maybe 5 or 10% less than that number. But I don't think there's any harm with building surpluses. But the question is, are you meeting the service needs of the community? And if the answer is yes, then there's no shame. I mean, you could even potentially use it for tax cuts. There was a time during my Palatine service where we received a bunch of state money. This was long before the state got in all the trouble they're in, but when we received a bunch of state money, and I proposed and got passed a plan to set aside almost tithing, where for 10 years we would take whatever the amount of money was. And, you know, I don't remember the amount, but it was a couple $1 million, and so we used each year for 10 years $200,000 for tax abatement. The problem with doing it all in one clump is then I cut your taxes by 25%, and the next year I raise them back by 50%. So, you know, that kind of math doesn't work.
One of the financial questions that's hanging out there right now has to do with impact fees, and Lee County's now charging in some areas and for some services 25% of the impact fees they could. They're looking at going up to 45%. The village will have its opportunity to set its percentage anywhere it wants to, up to 100. What's your position in terms of?
I was one of the first people to say that I favor the 100%. And the reason I do that is because we have so little vacant land that I don't think we're going to have any problem getting people to develop it. We've got developers standing in line, as I think those of you who are covering all these meetings know, and they're all anxious to come forward. And I mean, if we had a way to set them even higher, I think they'd still come. And I think the county made a mistake in what they did, and the fact that they can't fund some of the projects that are being requested from the various areas in the county, that's the reason why.
What's your involvement been with ECCL since you've been in Estero?
I have been an observer since probably the last 90 days since I was drafted by the folks at Grandeza. They had a committee that had been looking for people to run for the council, and at that point I in effect came out of retirement, but I do not have a long, extensive background serving with ECCL.
And so what's your feeling in terms of the amount of influence that they're gonna have on the city council going forward?
Well, I think that the documents and the studies that they've done are very valuable. I think that the people pool is the people pool that we will be using to recruit and staff any and all of our advisory boards, as well as other people who are willing to raise their hand who, you know, were maybe not the community representatives to ECCL. I'm sure there are a bunch of them that have skills. I mean, when you look at the profiles of a lot of the people who have retired in this area, I mean, it's just a vast pool of all kinds of different people, whether it's medical people, technology people, accounting people, legal people. You've got all these people who could help serve if they wanted. I mean, it's a question of getting them off the golf courses and
What are some of the committees that you think ought to be set up right off the bat?
well, my vision of the council structure is that we should have 6 or 7 standing committees and try to take advantage of whoever gets elected and whatever their expertise or interest is. And then, I mean, we will certainly need committees in the zoning and planning area. I mean, that goes without saying, but I think there are environmental issues, there are issues with the water supply, there are probably some issues with the public safety, although those aren't as pressing. I mean, we've got a very good and well-staffed fire protection district, and I hear very few complaints about the sheriff's level of service, so that doesn't appear to be a problem. Roads and transportation are all areas that probably need committees.
Based on your experience in Illinois with water supply, how's Estero fixed with water supply in particular?
I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. Palatine had the problem that the wells were going dry, and so we went to one of the nicest sources of water there is in the Midwest, which is Lake Michigan.
One of the first things the village council is going to have to do as far as managing the city, managing the village, is going to be getting a manager in there. Are you in favor of an interim manager? Where would you look for that individual?
I know that ECCL has already started that process through some kind of searching. I think we need somebody there immediately, and the sunshine laws basically say that we have to have a clearing point. I mean, we cannot talk to each other except in an open meeting. So somebody's got to be there to service to make an agenda and to set the tone. So he or she should be there immediately, so that almost dictates that we have to have an interim. If the interim turned out to be somebody who the council chose later on to be the permanent manager, that's okay. But we can't be managerless. That isn't going to work.
What qualities would you be looking for in that first manager?
Well, people skills is the key thing. But it would probably help if the person had Florida government experience, because each state is a little different. I mean, even though I have extensive Illinois experience, I'm still learning a lot about how Florida is structured, what you can and can't do, and how you qualify for different things. So. But I think also then, in order to help do that, we should join with the other towns. They have that association where they all share information. The other incorporated towns, especially the ones that are near us down here, south of the river. So.
Would you feel somebody, candidate from Florida would be best, or would you want to do a nationwide search?
Well, initially I think a Florida candidate would be better, because he or she would be familiar with the, but we'll be appointing a village attorney, and he or she would hopefully know a lot about Florida law. I mean, we would be relying on that individual to guide us, to get us going.
But as far as a permanent manager,
I'm open. I'm open. I've served with 4 different managers up north, and the last 2 I actually was one of the people that helped interview them. So
Jim, what is it that you think distinguishes you from your opponent?
We both have experience. His experience is primarily legal and investigative. My experience is primarily legislative and financial.
We asked the same question of your opponent, and part of his answer was he thinks what distinguishes him from you is integrity. Where do you feel you might lack integrity?
I don't feel that I lack integrity.
I would assume that that has something to do with the issue of your residency and having voted in Illinois and down here. Can you address that for us, please?
He's entitled to his opinion. I'm looking to the future, and I believe he's living in the past. So.
Was there an incident like that occurred?
Yes,
And you don't want to address it further?
but I believe it's a closed issue. The supervisor of elections allowed me to appear on the ballot and said that I was a Florida resident. So.
If you had that to do over again, would you still feel comfortable voting up in Illinois after you had residence down here?
Given what I know today, no.
What would you feel like the biggest challenge is for you coming into the village council here?
I think getting to understand what the other council members feel and believe, as well as trying to communicate open lines of communication with the residents, not only in District 7, but in the whole village.
Is there a strategy you were on the council in Illinois, probably had the same
Well,
situation where you're trying to reach out to the community, hear from the community?
Certainly,
How do
as
you go about
it deals, it's much easier to just deal with the issue in District 7, because District 7 only has 4 gated communities, so that I would appoint like an advisory committee from those 4 communities, and then we can work on issues that are local to the eastern part of of Estero, which is where the district is. We're going to see some of the most growth, and we're going to have some challenges. So that's the easy part, and we could meet somewhere over in that area on a regular basis.
I'm guessing those communities already have sort of.
Well, they have master
or
boards, and they have, most of them have subcommittees. I guess the preserves is just going through being turned over from a developer. But Bellaterra has a board, Wildcat has a board, and Grandeza has a board. I'm already obviously involved with Grandeza.
Do they count